In the vast, silent expanse of space, where stars burned like distant candles and planets drifted in endless orbits, a faint signal pierced through the void. It was weak, almost drowned out by cosmic noise, but it carried an unmistakable tone of desperation. The signal came from Earindor, a small, uncharted planet on the edge of the galaxy. To most, Earindor was insignificant, a speck among billions, but to those who listened closely, its plea for help echoed with urgency. The message reached the Deathworlder fleet, a group of hardened survivors known across the galaxy for their resilience. These were people who had grown up on planets so brutal, so unforgiving, that they earned their nickname not just as a title but as a badge of honor. Their ships, patched together from scraps of battles long past, were more than vessels. They were homes, fortresses, and symbols of defiance against a universe that seemed determined to crush them. Captain Cal Draven stood on the bridge of the fleet's flagship, the Iron Resolve. His sharp eyes scanned the holographic display showing the source of the distress call. A scar ran down his left cheek, a reminder of battles fought and survived. He wasn't a man given to sentimentality or grand speeches, but something about this signal stirred him. It wasn't the usual cry for help from settlers under attack or miners trapped in cave-ins. This was different, fragile, vulnerable. "Sir," said Lyra Voss, the fleet's communications officer, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "It's coming from a planet called Earindor. No major colonies, no trade routes, nothing worth exploiting. At least not officially." Cale frowned. "Then why are we hearing this?" he asked, more to himself than to Lyra. Turek, the fleet's engineer, leaned forward from his station. "Could be a trap. You know how these things go. Some warlord lures us in, then ambushes us when we're distracted." Cale shook his head. "No, this isn't a warlord. Listen to it again." He nodded at Lyra, who replayed the recording. The static-filled transmission crackled to life, carrying fragmented words in an alien tongue. But beneath the garbled speech was something undeniable, a raw, primal fear. "They're scared," Lyra murmured. "Whatever's happening there, it's bad." Cale turned to face his crew. They were a mismatched bunch, each bearing scars, physical and emotional, from lives spent surviving Deathworlds. There was Zora Ghost Marquez, the fearless pilot whose reflexes were unmatched. Tarek, the gruff genius who could turn scrap metal into miracles. And Lyra, whose calm demeanor masked a fierce determination. Together, they had faced countless dangers, always emerging battered but alive. "This isn't our fight," Cale began, his deep voice cutting through the hum of the ship. "We've got no stake in Earindor, no contracts, no credits waiting for us if we show up. But," he paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, "if we don't answer this call, who will? These aren't soldiers or mercenaries asking for help. They're vulnerable, defenseless. And if we turn away now, what does that make us?" The room fell silent. Each member of the crew wrestled with their own thoughts. For years, they had lived by one rule: survive at all costs. Helping others had never been part of the plan. But Kel's words struck a chord. Maybe it was time to change. Finally, Zara broke the silence. "So what's the plan, Captain?" A ghost of a smile crossed Kel's face. "We suit up. We head to Earindor. And we find out what or who is scaring them." As the Iron Resolve charted a course for the distant planet, the crew prepared for the unknown. None of them knew what awaited them on Earindor, but one thing was certain: this mission would test everything they believed about themselves, and perhaps redefine what it meant to be a Deathworlder. For the first time in a long while, hope flickered in the hearts of the fleet. The Iron Resolve and its accompanying fleet emerged from hyperspace near Earindor, a planet that shimmered like an emerald jewel against the blackness of space. Its surface was covered in dense forests, glowing rivers, and towering crystalline formations that refracted sunlight into dazzling hues. It looked peaceful, too peaceful to match the frantic distress signal they had received. But appearances could be deceiving. As the fleet approached, Captain Cal Draven ordered caution. "Stay sharp," he barked over the comms. "We don't know what we're walking into." Moments later, their sensors lit up with activity. Swarms of bioluminescent creatures erupted from the atmosphere, surrounding the ships like a living storm. Their bodies pulsed with light, casting eerie shadows across the fleet's hulls. At the same time, strange psychic pulses flooded the communication channels, causing static and disorienting everyone on board. "What the hell is this?" Zara Marquez shouted from her pilot's seat as she struggled to stabilize the Iron Resolve. Her hands moved instinctively over the controls, dodging the erratic movements of the glowing creatures. Lyra Voss clutched her head, wincing at the overwhelming mental noise. As the communications officer, she felt it more acutely than anyone else. The alien language from the distress signal now screamed inside her mind, fragmented and chaotic. She closed her eyes, focusing hard, trying to make sense of it. After several tense seconds, fragments began to form coherent thoughts. "They're afraid," Lyra gasped, opening her eyes wide. "They think we're here to hurt them." Cale frowned. "Afraid? Of us? We haven't even landed yet." Tarek, ever practical, leaned back in his chair. "Maybe they've seen our kind before. You know how corporations strip planets clean without batting an eye. Could be these critters are just defending themselves." Before Cale could respond, one of the larger creatures, a massive, serpentine being with wings made of translucent energy, charged directly at the Iron Resolve. Its roar shook the ship, rattling equipment and sending alarms blaring. "Captain," Zara yelled. "Permission to fire." "No," Cale snapped. "We're not here to start a war. Find another way." Tarek groaned but got to work. He tapped furiously at his console, rerouting power systems and recalibrating shields. Within minutes, he devised a solution. "I can emit a low-frequency pulse to disrupt their psychic signals. It won't hurt them. It'll just confuse them enough to give us breathing room." "Do it," Cale ordered. A soft hum filled the ship as Tarek activated the device. Almost immediately, the swarm of creatures faltered, their glowing lights dimming slightly. The larger serpent-like creature hesitated mid-flight, then retreated back toward the planet's surface. The psychic assault subsided, leaving the crew dazed but intact. "Well, that worked better than I expected," Tarek muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. But the relief was short-lived. As the fleet descended closer to Erindor, they encountered something far stranger. The forest canopy below parted, revealing massive tree-like beings whose bark shimmered like gold. These trees weren't ordinary plants. They were sentient, their branches swaying rhythmically, as if communicating silently. One of them extended a limb toward the Iron Resolve, releasing a burst of telepathic energy. "They want to talk," Lyra said, her voice trembling. "But they're still scared. They keep showing images of machines ripping apart their world." Cale clenched his jaw. Whatever was happening on Erindor, it wasn't natural. Someone, or something, had already done damage here. And now, the planet's inhabitants saw the Deathworlder fleet as both saviors and threats. "We need to prove we're not the enemy," Cale said firmly. "Lyra, see if you can establish communication. Use their language. We have to show them we mean no harm." As Lyra nodded and focused on deciphering the alien dialect, Cale turned to his crew. "This isn't going to be easy, but if we don't earn their trust, we might as well pack up and leave, because without their cooperation, we'll never figure out why they sent that signal or who's really behind it." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. For people used to fighting their way out of trouble, diplomacy felt foreign and risky. Yet there was no turning back now. Erindor had chosen them, whether they liked it or not. The eerie glow of Erindor's forests cast long shadows across the Iron Resolve's observation deck. Inside, Captain Cal Draven stood with his arms crossed, staring at the holographic map projected before him. Lyra Voss had managed to piece together fragments of communication from the sentient trees and creatures, but the message was clear. Erindor was under siege. "They're calling them metal beasts," Lyra explained, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "Giant machines that dig into the ground, tearing apart the planet's core. They've been stealing something, some kind of crystal embedded deep within the soil." Tarek frowned, leaning closer to examine the data on his tablet. "Crystals. That sounds familiar. Corporations love shiny rocks they can sell for credits. Could be energy sources or rare materials." Cal's jaw tightened. "It's Nexera Industries," he said grimly. The name alone carried weight. Nexera was one of the largest megacorporations in the galaxy, infamous for exploiting planets until there was nothing left. Entire ecosystems had been wiped out in their relentless pursuit of profit. Zara Marquez let out a low whistle. "If it's Nexera, we're in trouble. Those guys don't play nice. They'll have warships guarding their operation." Lyra nodded. "And according to the trees, these machines aren't just mining. They're poisoning the land. The crystals are tied to Erindor's life force. Without them, the entire ecosystem collapses." Cal turned to face his crew, his expression hardening. "This isn't just about saving a planet anymore. If Nexera gets away with this, they'll do it again somewhere else. And then another world after that. We stop them here, or we might as well hand over the galaxy to scavengers." The room fell silent. Each member of the fleet understood the stakes. This wasn't a simple rescue mission. It was a fight against greed itself. But taking on a corporation like Nexera wasn't going to be easy. Their fleets were vast, their resources endless. The Deathworlder fleet, by comparison, was small and battered, a ragtag group of survivors more accustomed to running than standing their ground. "We need a plan," Tarek said finally, breaking the silence. "Something smart, something they won't expect." Cal nodded. "Agreed. But first, we need intel. Zara, take a squad down to the surface. Find out exactly where Nexera is operating and what defenses they've got in place. Stay hidden. Don't engage unless you absolutely have to." Zara grinned, already itching for action. "You got it, Captain." "And Lyra," Cal continued, turning to the communications officer, "keep working with the trees. If we can get them to trust us fully, maybe they'll help us fight back. These creatures know their home better than anyone." As the crew dispersed to prepare, Cal lingered behind, staring at the glowing image of Erindor. He couldn't shake the feeling that this mission would test them in ways they hadn't anticipated. His people were fighters, survivors, but could they become protectors? Hours later, Zara returned with her report. She'd led a stealthy reconnaissance mission, slipping through the dense forests and avoiding detection by Nexera's patrols. What she found chilled everyone to the bone. "They're not just mining," Zara said, her usual bravado replaced by anger. "They're using automated drones to strip mine entire regions. The trees are dying where they pass. And worse," she hesitated, swallowing hard, "there are cages, big ones, filled with creatures, some of them sentient. They're experimenting on them." The revelation hit the crew like a punch to the gut. Nexera wasn't just destroying Erindor. They were enslaving its inhabitants, treating living beings like lab rats. Cal slammed his fist on the table. "That settles it. We don't just stop them. We shut them down completely. No mercy." For the first time since arriving at Erindor, the crew felt united, not just as mercenaries or survivors, but as defenders of something greater than themselves. The fragile world below depended on them now. Failure wasn't an option. But as Cal looked around the room, he knew the hardest battles were yet to come. Nexera wouldn't go down without a fight. And neither would the Deathworlder fleet. The Iron Resolve hung in orbit above Erindor, its crew buzzing with a mix of determination and unease. Captain Cal Draven knew they couldn't face Nexera Industries alone. The corporation's resources were vast, their technology advanced, and their ruthlessness unmatched. To stand a chance, the Deathworlder fleet needed allies, powerful ones. Kale called a meeting in the ship's war room, where holographic maps of nearby star systems floated above the table. "We can't do this by ourselves," he began, his voice firm but tinged with urgency. "Nexera will crush us if we go head-on without backup. We need help." Zara Marquez leaned forward, her sharp eyes scanning the map. "There are factions out there who hate Nexera as much as we do. The Scifi, for one. They've been fighting corporate exploitation for decades." Tarek nodded, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "And what about the Aetherians? They're reclusive, sure, but they've got tech that could turn the tide. If anyone can take on Nexera's drones, it's them." Lyra Voss spoke up softly, her tone cautious. "But how do we convince them to join us? Most of these groups don't trust outsiders, especially not mercenaries like us." Kale met her gaze. "Then we'll have to earn their trust. We'll show them we're here to protect, not destroy." With no time to waste, Kale split the fleet into diplomatic envoys. Zara volunteered to reach out to the Scifi, a nomadic insectoid species known for their guerrilla tactics and fierce independence. She took a small shuttle and headed toward their territory, a sprawling asteroid belt littered with derelict ships and makeshift trading posts. When she arrived, the Scifi greeted her with suspicion. Their leader, a towering figure named Vrixkal, clicked his mandibles impatiently as Zara explained the situation. "Why should we care about your fight?" he asked, his voice raspy and metallic. "Erindor is not our home." "Because if Nexera wins there, they'll come for you next," Zara replied, her tone unwavering. "You think they'll stop at one planet. Once they've stripped Erindor clean, they'll move on to the next vulnerable world. And yours won't be far behind." Vrixkal hesitated, his compound eyes glinting. Finally, he extended a clawed hand. "Very well. We will fight, but only because it serves our interests." Meanwhile, Lyra and Tarek traveled to the Aetherian homeworld, a shimmering expanse of floating islands suspended in an endless void. The Aetherians were ethereal beings, their translucent forms glowing faintly as they drifted through the air. Communicating with them was challenging. Their language consisted of harmonic vibrations rather than words. Lyra spent hours meditating alongside Thiller, the ancient tree entity from Erindor, whose psychic connection helped bridge the gap between species. Slowly, she conveyed the urgency of their mission. The Aetherians listened intently, their forms pulsing with light as they processed the information. "We sense the imbalance you speak of," one Aetherian finally said, its voice resonating like wind chimes. "To disrupt harmony is to invite chaos. We will aid you, but know this: violence must be tempered with wisdom." By the time the envoys returned, the coalition had taken shape. The Scifi brought swarms of agile fighters, perfect for hit-and-run attacks. The Aetherians offered gravity-manipulating devices capable of disabling enemy ships without causing permanent damage. Together, they formed an uneasy alliance united by a shared goal: stopping Nexera. Back aboard the Iron Resolve, Kale addressed the newly assembled forces. "This isn't just about saving Erindor," he declared, his voice echoing through the crowded hangar bay. "It's about proving that even the smallest voices deserve to be heard. Even the weakest lives matter. Today, we fight not for credits or power, but for hope." As cheers erupted from the diverse group of warriors, Kale felt a flicker of optimism. For the first time, he believed they might actually pull this off. But deep down, he knew the real battle was yet to come, and it would test every ounce of courage and ingenuity they possessed. The makeshift command center aboard the Iron Resolve buzzed with activity as the coalition prepared for what lay ahead. Captain Kale Draven moved through the crowded space, his presence commanding but calm. The weight of leadership rested heavily on his shoulders, but he wore it like armor, steady and unyielding. This wasn't just another fight. It was a war against greed, cruelty, and indifference. And every member of the Deathworlder fleet, and their newfound allies, knew the stakes. Tarek, The fleet's resourceful engineer had transformed one corner of the hangar into a chaotic workshop. Tools clattered against metal as he and a team of Scifi technicians worked tirelessly to retrofit salvage tech into eco-friendly weapons. Using Arinder's rare crystals as power sources, they created pulse rifles that could disable Nexera's drones without causing collateral damage. Tarek wiped sweat from his brow, muttering under his breath, "If this works, we'll have the cleanest arsenal in the galaxy." Nearby, Zara Marquez drilled squads of Scifi pilots in evasive maneuvers. Their small, insectoid ships darted around the hangar bay like angry hornets, practicing formations designed to outmaneuver larger vessels. Zara barked orders over the comms, her sharp voice cutting through the noise. "Faster. You've got to stay unpredictable. Hit hard, hit fast, then vanish before they know what hit 'em." On Arinder's surface, Lyra Voss stood among the glowing trees, her connection to Thaler growing stronger by the day. The ancient tree entity pulsed softly, its golden bark shimmering as it shared visions of possible futures. In some, the planet thrived, its ecosystem restored. In others, it lay barren, lifeless, a casualty of corporate greed. Thaler's psychic voice echoed in Lyra's mind. "Hope is fragile," it whispered, "but so too are those who wield destruction. Trust in unity." Back aboard the flagship, tensions simmered between factions. The Scifi were battle-hardened pragmatists, while the Aetherians valued harmony above all else. Arguments flared over strategy. Should they strike preemptively or wait for Nexera to make the first move? Kale intervened when voices grew too loud, reminding everyone why they were here. "We're not fighting for ourselves," he said firmly. "We're fighting for Arinder. For every world that can't defend itself. If we let our differences divide us, Nexera wins." As preparations continued, Kale wrestled with doubts in private. He paced the observation deck, staring at the swirling green and blue orb below. Could he truly lead such a diverse group to victory? His crew trusted him, but the Scifi and Aetherians were wild cards. What if his decisions cost lives? What if failure meant the end of Arinder and everything it represented? His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden alert. Nexera's propaganda machine had struck. Across nearby systems, broadcasts labeled the Deathworlder fleet as terrorists bent on destabilizing galactic order. Public opinion began to sway against them, painting their mission as reckless and dangerous. Kale clenched his fists, frustration boiling inside him. "They're trying to turn the galaxy against us," he muttered to Lyra, who had joined him on the deck. "Trying to make us look like villains." Lyra placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Then we prove them wrong. Every action we take has to show we're here to protect, not destroy. That's how we win, not just the battle, but the hearts of those watching." Her words steadied him. They couldn't control Nexera's lies, but they could control their response. With renewed resolve, Kale returned to the command center. "Listen up," he called, silencing the chatter. "Nexera wants to paint us as monsters. Let's give them something else to talk about. When this is over, I want the galaxy to see us as heroes." The room erupted in cheers. The coalition united once more. As final preparations wrapped up, Kale allowed himself a brief moment of hope. Against all odds, they were ready, or as ready as they'd ever be. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. The calm before the storm was short-lived. As dawn broke over Arinder's glowing forests, the coalition launched its first offensive against Nexera Industries. Captain Cal Draven stood on the bridge of the Iron Resolve, his sharp eyes scanning the tactical display. The plan was simple yet risky. Disable Nexera's mining drones and disrupt their operations without causing irreversible harm to the planet or its inhabitants. Zara Marquez led the charge, piloting her sleek fighter alongside swarms of Scifi ships. Their mission was to draw attention away from the main fleet while Tarek and a team of engineers infiltrated the drone network to sabotage it from within. "Stay sharp," Zara barked over the comms as they approached the first wave of automated machines. "These things don't sleep, and they sure as hell don't play fair. The battle erupted in flashes of light and bursts of energy. Nexura's drones were relentless, firing precision lasers that cut through the air like hot knives. But the Zithari pilots lived up to their reputation, weaving through enemy fire with insect-like agility. Their small crafts darted around the larger drones, peppering them with EMP blasts designed by Tarek. One by one, the machines sputtered and fell, their circuits fried. Meanwhile, aboard the Iron Resolve, Lyra Voss coordinated with Thiller, the ancient tree entity, to shield vulnerable regions of Erinder. Using the Etherians' gravity-manipulating devices, she created protective barriers around areas targeted by Nexura's mining operations. The shimmering fields deflected incoming attacks, buying precious time for the defenders. "Hold steady," Lyra called out, her voice calm but urgent. "We're keeping them safe, for now." But the victory came at a cost. Despite their efforts, several Zithari ships were lost in the chaos. Vrixkull, the Zithari leader, watched grimly as two of his best pilots vanished in fiery explosions. His mandibles clicked angrily, but he didn't waver. "This is war," he growled. "Sacrifices must be made." Back at the heart of the battle, Turek worked furiously inside a captured drone control hub. With Lyra guiding him remotely, he hacked into the system, uploading a virus that would cripple the entire mining operation. Sweat dripped down his face as alarms blared around him. "Almost there," he muttered, fingers flying across the console. Just as Nexura reinforcements arrived, the virus activated, shutting down hundreds of drones simultaneously. The sudden loss of machinery threw Nexura's forces into disarray. For a moment, the coalition had the upper hand. Cheers erupted among the crew of the Iron Resolve and their allies. But the celebration was short-lived. Nexura's warships loomed on the horizon, massive and menacing. They weren't just here to mine. They were here to conquer. Kale clenched his jaw, staring at the approaching fleet. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low but resolute. "Not even close." As the dust settled from the first strike, cracks began to show within the coalition. Casualties weighed heavily on everyone, and doubts crept in. Could they really stand against such overwhelming odds? Were they fighting for a lost cause? In the quiet moments after the battle, Kale found himself alone on the observation deck, gazing at the damaged surface of Erinder below. The scars left by Nexura's machines were visible even from space. Deep gouges in the land, rivers tainted with unnatural colors. He thought about the lives depending on him, both human and alien, and the fragile trust holding their alliance together. "We've taken the first step," he whispered to himself. "Now we hold the line, or die trying." Far below, Thaler pulsed softly, its golden light flickering like a heartbeat. It wasn't just a planet they were fighting for, it was hope itself. And as long as that hope burned, the Deathworlder fleet would keep fighting. The Coalition's victory from the first strike was short-lived. As repairs were made and wounded tended to, an uneasy tension settled over the Iron Resolve. The losses had been heavy, too heavy for some. Whispers of doubt spread like wildfire among the crew, fueled by exhaustion and fear. Could they really win against Nexura? Was this fight worth the cost? Captain Cal Draven felt it too, the weight of leadership pressing down on him. He moved through the ship, checking on his people, trying to bolster morale. But even he couldn't ignore the growing cracks in their fragile alliance. The Zithari mourned their fallen pilots, while the Aetherians questioned whether violence was truly the answer. Arguments flared in the corridors, tempers fraying under the strain. Then came the betrayal. It started with a breach, a sudden surge of enemy activity near Erinder's atmosphere. Nexura's warships launched a surprise counterattack, targeting not just the fleet but also vulnerable regions of the planet itself. The timing was too precise, too calculated. Someone had leaked critical intel about their positions and plans. Kale stormed onto the bridge, his face dark with fury. "Who did this?" he demanded, scanning the room. "Who sold us out?" Lyra Voss worked furiously at her station, tracing the source of the leak. Her fingers trembled as she uncovered the truth. "It's one of the Aetherians," she said softly, her voice laced with disbelief. They'd been transmitting data to Nexura. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. The Aetherians, who had preached harmony and balance, had betrayed them. Kale ordered the traitor detained immediately. When confronted, the glowing figure didn't deny its actions. Instead, it spoke in its melodic, resonant voice. "We acted to protect our own. Nexura threatened our homeworld. They promised destruction if we did not comply." Tarek slammed his fist on a nearby console. "So you just handed us over, after everything we've done for you?" The Aetherian's form flickered, guilt evident in its pulsing light. "We saw no other way." Kale stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You chose survival over solidarity. That's exactly what Nexura wants, to divide us, to make us turn on each other. But the damage was done." Trust within the coalition fractured further. The Zithari accused the Aetherians of cowardice, while others questioned whether any ally could truly be relied upon. Morale plummeted, threatening to unravel everything they'd built. In the midst of the turmoil, Lyra approached Cal privately. "What do we do now?" she asked, her tone heavy with worry. "If we can't trust each other, how can we keep fighting?" Cal sighed, rubbing his temples. For a moment, he looked older than he ever had before. Then, determination hardened his features. "We remind them why we're here," he said firmly. "Not for credits or glory, but because someone has to stand up for those who can't. If we let fear and betrayal break us, then Nexura wins." He called an emergency meeting aboard the Iron Resolve, gathering leaders from every faction. Standing before them, Kale laid out the stakes once more. "I won't lie to you," he began, his voice steady. "This is going to get harder. Nexura will keep coming at us, hitting us where it hurts. But if we give up now, if we let them tear us apart, we're no better than they are." His words struck a chord. Slowly, reluctantly, the factions began to regroup. Even the Aetherians, ashamed of their betrayal, vowed to make amends. They offered their remaining resources, pledging to fight alongside the fleet until the end. As the meeting concluded, Kale pulled the Aetherian traitor aside. "Why should I forgive you?" he asked bluntly. The being hesitated, its glow dimming slightly. "Because forgiveness is strength," it replied. "And because we have seen the error of our ways." Kale studied the creature for a long moment, then nodded. "Fine. But know this, if you betray us again, there won't be a second chance." With fragile unity restored, the coalition prepared for the next battle. But Kale knew the hardest tests were yet to come. Betrayal had left scars that wouldn't heal easily, and Nexura wasn't done playing dirty. The coalition's resolve had been shaken, but not broken. Captain Kale Draven stood on the bridge of the Iron Resolve, staring at the tactical display that showed Nexura's central hub orbiting Erendur, a massive fortress-like station bristling with weapons and crawling with automated defenses. It was the nerve center of their operation, the source of the mining drones, and the experiments on Erendur's creatures. If they could take it out, they'd cripple Nexura's efforts for good. But getting there wouldn't be easy. "We need a distraction," Zara Marcus said, leaning over the holographic map. Her sharp eyes scanned the layout of the station. "Something big enough to draw their attention away from the core." Tarek nodded, already sketching ideas on his tablet. "I can rig up some decoy ships, load them with EMP charges. When they blow, it'll knock out half their systems." Kale crossed his arms, considering the plan. "And while they're dealing with that, we send in a strike team to infiltrate the hub, disable it from the inside." Lyra Voss raised a hand hesitantly. "What about the Aetherians? Their gravity tech could help us bypass the outer defenses." Kale glanced at her, then at the Aetherian representatives who had remained loyal despite the earlier betrayal. One of them stepped forward, its glowing form pulsing softly. "We will assist," it said, its melodic voice steady. "This is our redemption." With the plan set, The coalition sprang into action. Tarek led a group of engineers to retrofit old cargo ships into explosive decoys, packing them with enough firepower to make Nexura think twice. Meanwhile, Zura trained a small squad of Zithari pilots to escort the decoys and ensure they reached their targets undetected. As night fell over Irindor, the fleet launched its assault. The decoy ships streaked toward the station, drawing fire from Nexura's turrets. When they detonated, the resulting EMP wave plunged the station into chaos, disabling shields and scrambling communications. Seizing the moment, Kale and Lyra led the infiltration team aboard cloaked shuttles provided by the Aetherians. Using their gravity-manipulating devices, the shuttles slipped through the weakened defenses and docked at a maintenance bay. Inside, the air was tense. The team moved silently, avoiding patrols of armed guards and automated sentries. Kale took point, his blaster ready, while Lyra hacked into terminals to guide them deeper into the station. Every corridor felt like a trap waiting to spring, every shadow a potential threat. Finally, they'd reached the control room, a cavernous chamber filled with blinking consoles and holographic displays. At its center stood Darius Forn, Nexura's ruthless CEO, flanked by a squad of elite mercenaries. His cold smile sent chills down their spines. "Impressive," he sneered, "but you're too late." Before anyone could react, alarms blared throughout the station. Vorn had activated a failsafe protocol, a countdown to self-destruct. The entire hub would collapse within minutes, taking Irindor's ecosystem with it. Kale clenched his jaw. "Split up. Lyra, disable the failsafe. I'll handle Vorn." While Lyra worked frantically at a terminal, Kale engaged Vorn and his guards in a fierce firefight. Bullets ricocheted off walls as Kale dodged and returned fire, his movements precise and calculated. Despite being outnumbered, he fought with the ferocity of a man who had nothing left to lose. In the final moments, Lyra managed to override the failsafe, stopping the countdown just seconds before disaster. Exhausted but victorious, she turned to see Kale standing over Vorn, who lay defeated on the floor. "It's over," Kale growled, his voice heavy with resolve. "Nexura's reign ends here." As the team regrouped and prepared to evacuate, the coalition celebrated a hard-won victory. But Kale knew this was only the beginning. Nexura might have lost this battle, but the war was far from finished. The control room of Nexura's central hub was a scene of chaos. Sparks flew from damaged consoles, alarms blared incessantly, and the faint hum of failing systems filled the air. Captain Cal Draven stood over Darius Vorn, his blaster trained on the defeated CEO. Vorn's smug demeanor had faded, replaced by desperation as he realized his empire was crumbling around him. "You think this changes anything?" Vorn spat, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "Nexura is bigger than me, bigger than all of you. Even if you destroy this station, others will rise in my place." Cal's grip tightened on his weapon, but he didn't fire. Instead, he leaned closer, his voice low and dangerous. "Maybe. But today, you fall. And maybe that'll be enough to remind the galaxy that greed has consequences." Behind them, Lyra Voss worked furiously at the main terminal, ensuring the failsafe protocol remained disabled. Her hands trembled as she typed, exhaustion etched across her face. The countdown had been stopped, but the station was still unstable. Every second they stayed inside risked collapse. "We need to go," Zara shouted from the doorway, her sharp eyes scanning the corridor for threats. "This whole place is coming down." Kale nodded, turning to leave. But then the ground shook violently. A massive explosion rocked the station, sending debris raining down. Nexura's automated defenses had reactivated, targeting the core systems in a last-ditch effort to complete the destruction. "Go," Kale yelled at his team. "I'll hold them off." "No," Lyra cried, rushing toward him. "We're not leaving without you." "There's no time to argue," Kale snapped, pushing her back gently. "Get everyone out. That's an order." Before anyone could protest further, Kale sprinted deeper into the station, heading straight for the source of the explosions. He knew what he had to do and what it would cost him. As he reached the reactor chamber, he found himself face to face with a squad of heavily armed drones. Their red optics glowed menacingly as they locked onto him. Back outside, the rest of the team scrambled aboard their cloaked shuttles. Lyra hesitated, staring at the crumbling station through the viewport. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "He can't die like this." Inside the reactor chamber, Kale moved quickly, planting explosive charges along critical points. His mind raced, not with fear, but with memories. Memories of battles fought, lives lost, and worlds saved. He thought about Arindor, its glowing forests, and sentient creatures now free from Nexora's grasp. If his sacrifice meant protecting them, then it was worth it. As the charges armed, Kale activated his comlink one last time. "Lyra," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos surrounding him. "Tell the crew, tell them I'm proud of what we've done. And tell them to keep fighting, for every world that needs a defender." "Kale, please," Lyra choked out, her voice breaking. "It's okay," he interrupted softly. "This isn't the end. It's just my part of the story." With that, he severed the connection. Moments later, the explosives detonated, engulfing the reactor chamber in a blinding flash of light. The shockwave tore through the station, collapsing its structure entirely. On board the shuttle, Lyra collapsed into her seat, sobbing quietly. The others sat in stunned silence, the weight of Kale's sacrifice sinking in. They had lost their captain, but they had won the battle. As the fleet regrouped above Arindor, the coalition mourned their fallen leader. Yet amidst the grief, there was also resolve. Kale's final act had cemented his legacy, not as a mercenary or survivor, but as a protector, someone who gave everything to ensure a better future. Lyra stepped forward, taking command of the Iron Resolve. Her voice wavered but carried strength. "Kale believed in us, in our ability to stand up for those who can't fight for themselves. We honor him by continuing his mission. Together." The crew nodded, determination replacing despair. Though Kale was gone, his spirit lived on in each of them. The Deathworlder fleet wasn't just a name anymore. It was a promise to defend the vulnerable, no matter the cost. Far below, Thaler pulsed softly, its golden light flickering like a heartbeat. It wasn't just a planet they had saved. It was hope itself. And as long as that hope burned, the fight would continue. Months had passed since the battle at Nexora's central hub, and Arindor was beginning to heal. The scars left by mining operations still lingered, deep gouges in the land, rivers tainted with unnatural colors. But life was slowly returning. The sentient trees pulsed with renewed energy, their golden bark glowing brighter than ever before. Creatures once caged and experimented on roamed freely again, their songs echoing through the forests like whispers of gratitude. The Iron Resolve orbited the planet, its crew quieter now, but no less determined. Captain Kale Draven's sacrifice weighed heavily on everyone, but his legacy inspired them to carry forward the mission he had given his life for. Lyra Voss, now leading the Deathworlder fleet, stood on the bridge, gazing at the shimmering world below. Her heart ached for Kale, but she found solace in knowing that his final act had changed not just Arindor, but the galaxy itself. In the aftermath of the battle, the Coalition had transformed into something greater. The Zithiri, Etherians, and other allies came together to form the Galactic Preservation Accord, an organization dedicated to protecting vulnerable planets and species from exploitation. It wasn't perfect. Old tensions occasionally flared, but it was a start. For the first time in decades, there was hope that corporate greed could be challenged, not just endured. On Arindor's surface, Thaler, the ancient tree entity, extended one of its massive branches toward Lyra as she visited the planet. Its psychic voice resonated softly in her mind. "Your captain gave much. His spirit lives within you all." Lyra placed a hand on the tree's glowing bark, tears welling up in her eyes. "We'll keep fighting," she whispered. "For him, for you, for everyone who deserves a chance to thrive." Filler responded by releasing a fragment of its essence, a small crystalline shard that shimmered with golden light. Lyra held it carefully, feeling its warmth spread through her fingers. It was a gift, a symbol of the bond between humanity and nature. She brought it back to the fleet, where it was placed in the center of the Iron Resolve's observation deck. There, it served as a reminder of what they fought for, and why. As the fleet prepared to depart Erindor, the crew gathered for one last meeting. Lyra addressed them, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "Kale taught us that we're more than survivors. We're protectors. And while he may be gone, his vision lives on in each of us. Today, we leave Erindor behind, but our work is far from over. There are other worlds out there, other lives depending on us. Let's make sure they never face what this planet did." The room erupted in cheers, the crew united by a shared purpose. They were no longer just mercenaries or wanderers. They were guardians of the galaxy's most vulnerable. With engines roaring to life, the Iron Resolve and its accompanying ships broke orbit, leaving Erindor behind. Ahead lay uncharted systems, new challenges, and countless opportunities to continue Cal's mission. As the fleet disappeared into the stars, hope flickered brightly in the hearts of its members. Far below, Feller watched them go, its golden glow pulsing softly. Though the Deathworlder fleet was gone, their impact remained. Erindor would thrive again, not because of crystals or technology, but because someone had chosen to stand against destruction and fight for life. And so, under the vast expanse of space, the story of the Deathworlder fleet became legend, a tale of courage, sacrifice, and redemption. A reminder that even in the darkest corners of the universe, light could still shine, if only someone was